Go to any site meeting anywhere in the world, and the one question you will always hear at virtually every meeting is, what's the critical path? Now, for those that don't know what the critical path is, all it means is that this line in red here of tasks is an unbroken chain of work. It's the longest unbroken chain of work running through the entire job from start to finish. And what that means is, as each task finishes, the next one starts immediately. And as you can see, it runs down through and eventually you get to the end. That longest chain of unbroken work is the shortest possible time it will take to build the job. And so the reason why it's asked so often is it directly affects the finish date. Now, the one question you never really hear asked is, okay, well, that's the critical path. What's next to the critical path? What's the next most critical jobs? Because the reality is most people think that the critical path is fixed, and it's not. The critical path moves around all of the time because the critical path is based on the relationships between all of the tasks. Every task in the job should be linked to something, basically, even if it's only the start and the finish. And those relationships then set where a task needs to start, or where the piece of work needs to start, and where it finishes. And if it's not on the critical path, there's an amount of time of slack. So as you can see, when this task here finishes, this one starts, and as this chain of work runs through here, it finishes here, and then before the next task that it leads into, there's a period of time, and that is basically what slack is. And what I'm going to do now is explain or show why it's important to know exactly how much slack you've got, because the amount of slack that a task has is directly proportional to how close to critical it is. And some jobs can wait, some jobs can't. If you don't know how much slack you've got in the job, you don't know whether the job can wait or whether it has to be done now or within the next day or two. It sets a natural priority for works running through the job. So the next question then is, how do we know exactly how much total slack there is? And the answer is, it's actually quite straightforward. A project works it out for you. So if I just insert a column here now called total slack, and project works through all the relationships, it works out the critical path, and then it works out, as part of that process, it works out how much slack there is in each task. So if we look at this task, it's telling me that this task has 15 days or 3 weeks of slack. And as you look down this list here, you can see this is a critical task. It leads into this task. So between this and this, there is no slack, and the chain runs through here. Now, this task starts immediately afterwards, but as the chain of work runs down, it finishes here. So it finishes short of this chain of work, and the amount of slack, this 15 days, is actually the amount of slack showing here. There's 15 days before it then affects the next task in its relationship, is this task here, and there's 15 days gap because this is being pushed out to this point by this chain of work. Likewise, if we look at this one down here, this chain of work has 1 day of slack, and this chain of work has got 9 days of slack. So this chain of work is obviously quite important in relation to the critical path, because if, say, this job takes 20 days to complete, immediately the critical path will jump onto that. So this is why it's important to know how much time you've got sitting around on jobs that are not on critical path. Because whereas this job, any of these jobs in this chain of work could literally start 3 weeks late and would only then become close to the critical path. Whereas this chain of work, any one of these only needs to take a day longer or start a day later, and they'll become critical. Now, this job has only got 35 lines. This is just a quick sample I threw together to illustrate the point. But if you imagine you have a program that's maybe 5,000 or 6,000 lines, all of these things are important to know, but when you run down a list of 6,000 lines, they don't immediately jump out to you. It just blurs into one. So a better way of actually having a reminder or having a notice that will let you know immediately when things are getting close or becoming close to critical path is to have an indicator. And setting up an indicator is just basically setting up a formula in a custom column that looks how much time there is on the slack, and if the slack is within a set range, it will give you an indicator. And what I'm going to do now is I'll show you how to set one of these up. So the first thing we do is to go into custom fields in the project tab, and basically I'm going to rename this first text field. The text fields are basically blank fields that you can customize to suit your own requirements. So I have all sorts of different custom fields that I use. So what we're going to do is we're going to use text field 1, and we're going to rename it, and I'll call it critical slack. Critical slack. And that basically renames it. Now what I'm going to do is set a formula that sets the parameters for what I want to test. And what I want to test is basically I want an indicator that will show me when tasks on the Gantt chart become critical. I'm also going to have an indicator that will tell me if there is 5 days or less of slack, so they're getting close. And then another step out from that is whether there's between 5 and 10 days. So it gives me like a traffic light system, if you like, to give me an advanced warning that things are becoming closer to critical. Then as they get below a week, they're giving me a bigger warning, and then they'll ping up in red showing that they're critical. And the way we're going to do that is by writing a formula. So you can see down here we've got a number of options and a button right here saying formula. So we open that button, and this then gives us a number of options. We can press buttons to insert operators, commands, etc. So the first thing we're going to do is insert a function, and the function we're going to insert is a command argument called switch, and that is in the general section, and click on it and it inserts the command test that we're going to do now. Switch is essentially an if statement, and what it's saying is test expression 1, so test something, and if it's true, put in a value. If it's not true, do the next test, and if it's true, enter the next value. If that's not true, then move to the next test, and so it goes on, and you can add something like 120 different layers of questions. So what we're going to do is, for the expression, that's our first logical test. If I just highlight that, and I'm going to use the field button and insert a field, and the field we're going to insert is total slack, which is one of a subsection of the duration section. So total slack. So we insert a field, and the test we're going to make is total slack equal to 0? In other words, is it critical? No day slack. So equals 0, and I actually deleted it accidentally when I pasted, but there then should be a comma there. Now what the question is asking now is total slack equal to 0. If that's true and it is total equal to 0, then I'm going to give it a value of 1. And because I'm telling the computer to insert a piece of text, I have to put it inside quotation marks. So this could be, I could say, insert word critical or whatever. I'm actually just going to give it a value of 1. Now, the next part of the logical test is, if it's not true, if total slack isn't equal to 0, then I want another test. And the next test I'm going to make is it greater than 0? but less than or equal to 5 or 5 days. Now, it's not quite so simple as just putting in, is it less than or equal to 5? Microsoft Project actually calculates time in minutes. So to get 5 days, I have to work out the number of minutes in 5 days. So essentially, you have to do the calculation first of 60 minutes per hour, 8 hours per day times 5 days. That equals 2,400 minutes. So the expression I'm testing now is again going to be total slack. So in the duration, total slack. And my test is going to be, is it greater than 0? And there's a second part to create the range. So it's going to be, is it greater than 0 and again, back to the field, total slack. Into the duration, total slack. And is it less than or equal to 5 days? And as I say, 5 days is 2,400 minutes. So 2,400. And if that's true, then I want to insert the value 2. So quotation marks 2, quotation. Now, to carry on now to my third test will be if my second test is still not true, then my third test is it greater than 5 but less than or equal to 10? So again, the same argument, and instead of just going through pressing the buttons again, I'm actually, just for speed, I'm going to copy everything to that point. Control C, and I'm going to insert it here. And then just, so in this case now, because I want to see whether it's greater than 2,400, which is 5 days, and less than or equal to 10 days is 4,800. So 4,800. And if that's true, then I want the value 3. And that essentially is the formula. However, there just is one little twist on that now. It's that anything that is greater than 10 would return a null value. And unless I put in an argument that will just cover that off, it will return an error. So I would have 1, 2, 3 or error. So to close off the error, I'm just going to give it a catch-all for anything else. And basically what I will say with that is if total slack is greater than 4,800, give it a 0 value. So again, just by copying, and you notice the comma here after the 3, just to make sure that's in. I'm going to paste in there total slack and edit that to say, is it greater than 4,800? If it's greater than 4,800, so comma, and the value I want to put in now is going to be 0. And that's the end of it. Now, I'll put up a sheet that shows this a bit clearer because it's not the clearest thing to follow and understand. Clicking OK on that, it's saying any existing data that's already in that column will be deleted. It's just a warning in case I'd actually had something else in there, and it's just a catch-all to prevent me overwriting information that might be important. But I know there's nothing in there, so I'm all happy, so I'll click OK. And that now, the calculation is set. So if I click OK, now to show you how it works, I'll insert the column. So I start typing in critical. We can see there's now my critical slack, and as you can see now, if it's got 0 days slack, it gives a value of 1. If it's more than 10 days slack, it gives a value of 0. If we move down to here, if it's between 0 and 5, we get a value of 2, and if it's between 5 and 10, we get a value of 3. Now, that then is the thing that sets I'll just put these into the center just for a bit of neater. This then is what sets the values for the indicators. And the way we set in the indicators, if we go back into the custom fields tab and we go back to our calculated column and go down to the bottom, at the moment we're showing it as data. That's this 1, 2, 3. We're going to change it to this button here, says graphical indicators. And this again then just becomes a logical test. We have a drop down list of things we can choose. So I'm going to, the first test I'm going to say is it equal to 1? And if it's equal to 1, being critical, then let's have a look. You can see you've got a number of graphics. I don't think the range is particularly great myself, but let's say we'll choose that one. So red diamond for any critical works. Same thing again, equals 2. And we'll set the graphical indicator for that to say yellow square. And then the third again equals 3. And in this case, just scrolling down and looking through here, I generally like to use the clock one just because it sort of tells you the clock's ticking. Okay, now if I click OK on that and then close out of that, you see now this is changed to a graphical indicator. So now I don't need to be worrying about scrolling down thousands of numbers and hoping the ones will pop out to me, because I've got a very quick and clear, easy indicator. If it's outside of 10 days, there's nothing. If it's critical, it's red. If it's within 5 days, it's a yellow indicator. And if it's within the 10 days, it's a clock. And as I say, this is only a small program, but I'll jump across to another program just to show you in practice over quite a large job. This job's got around 3,000 lines in it. So you can see very quickly I can scroll through an awful lot of information and see immediately where things are starting to come into, coming into the 10 days. And if I just scroll to task, so it's showing me here now these tasks are within 2 weeks of being critical. Just scroll back up until we see a few of these indicators up here. Critical tasks, as you can see in red. This task, although not critical, it's actually sitting linked between 2 critical tasks, and in this case it's only got a couple of days. So if I just insert the total slack column just so we can get an indication of where things are sitting as a comparison. So 1.67 days, so it's a day and a half. It's within a day and a half of slack. 6.5 days, 8 days, 1 day. So you can see it is really useful when you're scrolling through a program quickly that you can immediately zoom into an area and see exactly whether something is close to critical or not, how much time you've actually got. So this job, for instance, it can only be late by 3 days before it becomes critical. Whereas the things that are, you can see there at 113 days, they just, it doesn't matter. You could leave that job sitting in place. In that case, that was propping. You could leave the propping sitting there for months and it doesn't become critical or impact anything. So it's just a really, really useful and quick thing to have. Now, what you can also do with it, as I've shown you in other videos, is all of these columns are basically filterable. So we can quite easily filter, not just for critical path. I mean, generally, if I go into view, you would look at critical path here and say, right, what's critical? And here's my critical path for the job. This is every critical task. But if I go out of that, I can also now, by using this column, I could say, all right, what's not just critical, but what is within 5 days of critical path. And jobs that are close to the critical path will automatically show up with the critical. So I know that not just that these are critical, but these are very close to critical. So it allows me to focus in and see exactly what's going on. So I always, as a site manager, I always know where I stand, and I always know just how critical or how close to critical something is. It allows me ease of prioritizing works to ensure that I can stay on track. And now I hope that again has been useful to you. It certainly makes life easier if you're a site manager or a project manager for getting a quick heads up and a quick overview of exactly what's going on. And the whole point of program for a site manager and the site management team is to have information to hand very, very quickly that makes it very, very easy to make informed decisions about what has to happen. That's the way you stay on track. That's the way you get ahead of program, and that's the way you avoid paying penalties. So, as always, if you've got any queries or any questions out of any of this, send me a message on LinkedIn or send me an email, and I hope it really is of good use to you. Okay, I'll leave it there.